The cold wind swept across the railway platform with a biting ferocity that seemed to penetrate through every layer of clothing. Sarah clutched her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders, her fingers numb despite being tucked under her arms. She had been sitting on that wooden bench for nearly 2 hours, watching the sun sink lower on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. But beauty was the last thing on her mind as she shivered in the approaching twilight, wondering if she had made the most foolish decision of her entire life. 3 months ago, back in Boston, the idea of becoming a mail-order bride had seemed like an adventure, a chance at a new life far from the suffocating confines of her aunt's boarding house where she had worked since her parents died. The advertisement in the newspaper had been simple and straightforward, seeking a respectable woman willing to travel west to become a wife to a rancher in Montana Territory. The letters that followed had been courteous, even charming in their own way. James McKenna had written about his ranch, about the vast open spaces and the mountains that touched the sky, about building something meaningful in a land where a person's past didn't matter as much as their character and willingness to work hard. She had responded with cautious optimism, sharing carefully selected details about herself, her education at a modest girls' school, her skills in cooking and sewing, her love of reading, and her dreams of having a family of her own someday. His responses had been encouraging, and within 6 weeks, he had sent money for her passage west along with a proposal of marriage. She had accepted, much to her aunt's horror and her few friends' concern, and had boarded the train with a single trunk containing all her worldly possessions and a heart full of hope mixed with terror. The journey had been long and exhausting, taking her through landscapes she had only read about in books. She had watched the cities give way to towns, the towns to settlements, and finally to this small station in the middle of what felt like nowhere. The telegram she had sent from her last stop had clearly stated her arrival time. Yet as the other passengers dispersed, claimed by waiting family members or heading to the small hotel visible down the dirt road, she remained alone on the platform with her trunk beside her. Doubt crept in with each passing minute, whispering cruel possibilities into her mind. Perhaps he had changed his mind. Perhaps he had found someone else. Perhaps this had all been some elaborate deception, and she was now stranded in a strange place with barely enough money to survive a week, let alone book passage back to Boston. The station master had asked twice if she needed assistance, if there was someone he could send word to, but she had assured him someone was coming, even as her confidence in that statement dwindled with the fading light. The temperature dropped noticeably as the sun touched the distant mountains, and Sarah's shivering intensified. Her traveling dress, which had seemed adequate when she boarded the train in the relative warmth of early autumn back east, was pitifully inadequate for the sharp cold of a Montana evening. She tried to keep her teeth from chattering, tried to maintain some semblance of dignity and composure, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. Her feet were cold despite her boots, and her hands had lost most of their feeling. She was seriously considering swallowing her pride, and asking the station master if there was a church or charitable organization that might help her when she heard the sound of hoofbeats and wheels on the hard-packed road. Looking up, she saw a wagon approaching, pulled by 2 sturdy horses, and her heart began to race. This had to be him. It had to be. She stood up, brushing at her skirt with numb fingers, trying to smooth her wind-tangled hair, wanting to make a good first impression despite the circumstances. The wagon pulled up beside the platform, and a man jumped down with an easy athleticism that spoke of a life lived outdoors. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing dusty jeans, a worn work shirt, and a sheepskin jacket with the collar turned up against the cold. A black wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face, but she could see strong features, a firm jaw covered with several days' worth of stubble, and eyes that were assessing her with an intensity that made her even more nervous than she already was. He removed his hat as he approached, revealing dark hair that needed cutting and sun-weathered skin that made his age hard to determine. He could have been 30 or 40, though his eyes held a weariness that suggested he had lived more years than his face showed. For a long moment they simply looked at each other, 2 strangers bound by letters and a promise, now faced with the reality of that commitment. "Miss Sarah Whitmore?" His voice was deep and rough, as if he didn't use it often, but not unkind. When she nodded, unable to find her voice, he continued, "I'm James McKenna. I apologize for being late, had trouble with a fence line that couldn't wait. I sent my hand to meet you, but he never showed. Found out later his horse threw a shoe 5 miles out." Sarah wanted to respond, wanted to say something gracious and understanding, but her jaw was clenched against the shivering and her teeth threatened to chatter if she opened her mouth. She managed a small nod, hoping he would take it as acceptance of his apology. His eyes narrowed slightly as he studied her more closely, and she saw the moment he realized how cold she was. Without a word, he shrugged out of his heavy sheepskin jacket and in 3 long strides was beside her, draping it over her shoulders. The coat was enormous on her frame, the hem hanging nearly to her knees, and it was warm from his body heat, smelling of leather, wood smoke, and something else she couldn't quite identify, something masculine and not unpleasant. The weight of it, the sudden warmth, was so overwhelming that she felt tears prick at her eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely, determined not to cry in front of this stranger who was supposed to become her husband. "How long have you been sitting out here in the cold?" he asked, his voice carrying a note of concern that surprised her. She had expected anger, perhaps criticism for not being better prepared, but not concern. 2 hours, perhaps a bit more, she managed to say, her voice smaller than she intended. The train was on time. She saw something flash across his face, anger perhaps, but not directed at her. He muttered something under his breath that she didn't quite catch, then turned to her trunk. He hefted it easily, as if it weighed nothing, and carried it to the wagon, securing it in the back. When he returned, he held out his hand to her. "Can you walk, or do you need me to carry you? Your feet must be near frozen." The question was practical, not mocking, and Sarah appreciated that even as she felt embarrassed by her condition. She took his offered hand, surprised by the strength in his grip and the steadiness he provided as she stood on legs that had stiffened from sitting in the cold. "I can walk," she assured him, though her first steps were unsteady. He kept his hand under her elbow, guiding her to the wagon, and helped her up onto the seat with a care that contradicted his rough appearance. He climbed up beside her, took up the reins, and with a click of his tongue, the horses started moving. They rode in silence for several minutes as the wagon left the small station behind and headed down a road that cut through rolling grassland. Sarah pulled his coat tighter around herself, grateful for the warmth even as she felt awkward sitting beside this man wearing his clothing. The sky was darkening now, stars beginning to appear in the deepening blue, and the cold seemed to intensify with the approaching night. "The ranch is about an hour from here," he said finally, breaking the silence. "We'll get you warm and fed when we arrive. Mrs. Chen, my housekeeper, has prepared a room for you. She's been cooking all day, determined to make a good impression." He glanced at her sidelong, and she thought she detected a hint of humor in his expression. "Fair warning, she'll try to feed you until you burst. Just accept it. Easier that way." Despite everything, Sarah felt a small smile tug at her lips. "I'll keep that in mind. I know this isn't what you expected," he continued, his voice careful, as if choosing his words with consideration. "Finding yourself alone at a cold station, waiting for a stranger who was late. I'm sorry for that. It's not how I wanted our first meeting to go." "You had responsibilities on your ranch," Sarah said, finding her voice growing steadier as the warmth from his coat seeped deeper into her bones. "I understand that. I knew when I agreed to this that ranch life would be unpredictable." He nodded slowly, seeming to appreciate her understanding. "It is that, unpredictable and hard. The winters here are brutal, the summers can be scorching, and there's always more work than hours in the day. It's not an easy life I'm offering you, Miss Whitmore. I want you to know that up front. I won't lie to you and pretend it's something it's not." She appreciated his honesty even as his words made her slightly anxious. "I didn't come here expecting an easy life, Mr. McKenna. I came because I wanted a purpose, a home, and the chance to build something meaningful. Your letters suggested that's what you wanted too." "It is," he confirmed, and there was something in his voice that made her look at him more closely. In the fading light, his profile was strong and serious, the face of a man who had known hardship and hadn't let it break him. "I've been alone on this ranch for 3 years now, since my father passed. Built a good herd, improved the land, but a ranch isn't just about cattle and grass. It needs to be a home, and I've forgotten how to make it that. Thought maybe someone else might remember." The vulnerability in that admission touched something in Sarah's heart. Here was a man who worked hard, who had built something with his own hands, but who recognized that success meant more than just material achievement. She thought about her own loneliness in Boston, the years of feeling like she was simply existing rather than living, and felt a kinship with this stranger beside her. "I think a home is made by people who care about it and each other," she said quietly. "Perhaps we can figure it out together." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something soften in his expression. "Perhaps we can," he agreed. Then, with a slight smile that transformed his stern features, he added, "Though you'll have to stop shivering first. Can't build a home with someone who's frozen solid." She surprised herself by laughing, a genuine sound that seemed to startle both of them. "Then I suppose it's fortunate you had the good sense to give me your coat, even if you're now the one freezing." "I've weathered worse," he assured her, though she noticed he had turned up his shirt collar and his shoulders were slightly hunched against the cold. Without overthinking it, she adjusted the coat so that one side draped over his shoulder as well, creating a shared warmth between them. He looked surprised but didn't pull away, and they continued down the dark road, two strangers beginning the long journey toward becoming something more.